And you're welcome to the RTÉ Rugby podcast as we look ahead to the final round of the Six Nations Championship with the asterisks of France and Scotland still to be played. Ireland on the back of a win last weekend. Much needed win, you'd have to say. I'm delighted to say that Donal Lenihan, Liddy and Jonny Holland is back with us again. Jonny, good to have you on board.
Thanks, Hugh. It's good to be back.
Yeah, so we've lots to get through. Look, first of all, Donal, just your assessment of the game against Scotland. Maybe overall sense seems to be it wasn't the prettiest game, but Ireland got the job done. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Look, I think it was a very frustrating game. I mean, I think I thought the opening 20 minutes of the match, I thought they controlled the game brilliantly, played in the right areas of the field, brought a very good mix to their game, pressurised Scotland, and, you know, a Scottish team that had started the championship so well in terms of beating England away. They were in control of the game against Wales and kind of lost their way after Ferguson got sent off. So this was a Scottish team with a point to prove. They'd been left kind of waiting 4 weeks to address the scab of the Welsh game, if you like. And, you know, any semblance of grandeur that they had, I thought Ireland took away in that opening 20 minutes. But then you look as the game progressed, when you go into a 24-10 lead at this level of rugby, you shouldn't be hanging on at the end and waiting for an outstanding piece of individual. I mean, Johnny Sexton, clutch kick, not an easy kick, very difficult conditions. You're about 3 meters in from the left-hand touchline. So the concern really for me is how Ireland found themselves in that position, given that they were so dominant, particularly in the first and the third quarter.
I guess, Wes, you know, after Saturday's game, you know, an absolute classic between France and England, it was a bit like going to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa and then be handed a finger painting by your 6-year-old. Like, I mean, the contrast between the two games was just chalk and cheese.
Yeah, it certainly puts into context, I suppose, some of the praise Scotland have been coming in for. I mean, you know, Eddie O'Sullivan came in for a lot of criticism when he called them deluded there. It was referenced a few times in the build-up to the game. But, I mean, you know, to kind of claw your way back from 14 points down and then give up 3 points from a turnover from a box kick that gets charged down. I mean, it's just not something you see good teams do, really. So, I mean, there was a phase there after Ireland took the lead in the 78th minute where I counted between 78 minutes on the clock and 78:30 on the clock. Ireland desperately needing to hold on to the ball and maintain their lead. Scotland desperately needing a score to get back into the game. And the ball was kicked away 5 times in 30 seconds between the two teams, which was pretty hard to understand, really, and somewhat symptomatic of a lot of parts of the game, I think.
Yeah, it was. And Johnny, look, as a spectacle, it wasn't the greatest. I'm sure Andy Farrell won't care. I mean, the important thing, I guess, when the championship is over is that, you know, his CV will read that he has 2 wins so far and England still to come. But nevertheless, it does kind of throw up a few issues that have kind of been hounding him, I suppose, over the last while. And namely, again, you know, when Ireland have the ball, you know, we don't seem to be very clinical. We don't seem to have a kind of a clear plan on what to do with it. And it's the attack side of Ireland's game that still leaves a lot of questions unanswered, I think.
Yeah, I suppose it does. Like, and you know, I think it is being that clinical. You know, I kind of referenced that Ireland need to build a lead to start playing a bit of rugby. Like, and they did build that lead, but all of a sudden they gave up the lead with a poor missed tackle and maybe just kind of soaking tackles as well. So, like, you know, I think in the first half, not to keep going back to the past, but I think like under different management, they wouldn't have been allowed to give up that lead, and they would have actually had to, you know, build 1 or 2 more scores in that first half that I think they let slip. But, you know, I think Andy Farrell's way is to kind of empower the players, and that's what we're being told, at least. And that's what I would imagine with my limited kind of dealings with the man. But I think like that is what they're being kind of asked to express. And I think that's part of getting used to that, you know, that you do kind of give up a few scores, and it's not up to the coach to kind of give you the teacher's slap across the wrist. Like it's up to the players to actually kind of grab a hold of that. And I think that they are learning that. But like, you know, you said that the attack probably suffered a small bit, and I got a fellow replying to my Twitter during the week, and he was asking who can we put into 13 to be a better playmaker, and I was kind of thinking, was that Gary Ringrose we got playing at 13, like one of the most exciting 13s that we have, you know? And I was kind of going, Jesus, you can't replace the person, maybe you just replace the tactics that we're using. And you can kind of see that Gary Ringrose is running short lines, and he is kind of maybe narrowing the pitch a small bit, whereas we know he's got the ability to bounce out, and we know he's got the ability to distribute. So maybe it's not the personnel, and maybe it's just still getting used to the way they're being asked to play. His eyes have probably been in quite a bit in the past, and just getting someone like that, getting his eyes up. And I know with him being out this weekend, and we probably had a good conversation on Robbie Henshaw the last time I was on this podcast, or one of the last times I was on it, and we were talking about how important he was. And I think that's come to fruition now. Do you put him into 13 because he can distribute? But you know, I don't know if it's so much the personnel. It's just getting used to that way that they're playing still. And I do think there's a little bit within them that they will bring, but I do think they need to bring it out as well, because, you know, going 24-10 and then just soaking up everything after that with no attack after that is brutal enough, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that, you know, after the game, I remember being really just disappointed, even despite the fact that we got the win, primarily because I was looking around, obviously, in the context of what England and France did the previous day, and then you look at the likes of New Zealand and say even South Africa and the top sides in the world at the moment, and like performances like that will get us nowhere near being able to even take on and be able to compete with the top sides. I think one of the stats after the game was that we had 3 line breaks in the entire match, and 6 defenders beaten, which I guess sums up how stale the attack has become.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I also think, look, when you look at where we were 3 years ago to where we are now, we had the capacity to go down to South Africa, beat South Africa down there in 2016. We went to Australia. We won a test series 2-1. We beat New Zealand in Dublin. Whereas now, I think, you know, we're not in a position to compete on a regular basis with the top 3 or 4 teams in the world. And that's a concern. You take Johnny's point in relation to Gary Ringrose. Gary Ringrose, we all know, is an outstanding player. But as of now, I mean, I put myself in Warren Gatland. The cameras, they love going to Gatty in the matches because there's nobody else, obviously. He's the only supporter in the whole place. So he's out every 5 minutes. But, I mean, I actually felt sorry for Gary Ringrose. In my view, like going back to 4 weeks ago, he was a shoo-in to go on a Lions squad, you know, hoping there is a Lions tour and, you know, a debate for another day. But as of now, I mean, he looked very tentative, very poor the last day. As Johnny said, kept cutting back inside. His ability to beat people on the outside, the quality of his game. He kicked away possession twice. One of them led to that calamitous try from Finn Russell. This isn't the Gary Ringrose that we know. And the way he's been asked to play is actually playing him out of contention for a Lions squad. And I think that's reflective of where we are. We should be playing to our strengths. Like James Lowe will come up for debate, I'm quite sure. We all know the one thing he has is ability to beat people in broken play. What's the point in picking him if he doesn't get those opportunities? His defence has unfortunately been proved not to be up to international standard. I think he's missed 7 of 17 tackles that have come his way, and therefore that should cost him his place on the team. But if you pick a guy to do a job for you, then give him the tools to be able to implement what he does best. And the other thing I think that really concerned me, all the top teams, you go, if you have your New Zealand, South Africa, and you're 14 points ahead, of the opposition, well, then you go for the jugular and you put more and you keep on pressing and attacking because they're the guys who are stressed. Their defense is coming under pressure. So why do you take the pressure off them? And finally, in that final quarter, when Scotland actually outscored us, they had Stuart Hogg was a makeshift 10. Finn Russell had gone off. They had Nick Haining, who's a small number 8, had to go into the second row. At that stage, Scotland had lost both Johnny Gray and Scott Cummings. And they had Scott Steele, who's number 2 or 3 scrum half, I think, for Harlequins. He was playing in the back row. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't even know where. Like getting into the scrum, he was almost like some fellow who won a competition to be part of the team for the day.
Yeah.
And yet they outplayed us in that final quarter. That, for me, is hugely concerning. I mean, flip the mindset going into England could easily have happened if Johnny Sexton's kick just shaded. The wind seemed to take it in at the last second inside the left-hand upright. If it had gone on the other side of the post, you were looking at a draw. I mean, how flat and how disappointed would you feel after that?
Absolutely. And look, a couple of key issues there. Well, look, the James Lowe issue is a big one. I think, on his watch, he's been responsible for 4 tries just from missed tackles and poor reads. him alone. So can we just say now that the James Lowe experiment or whatever it is over, and that, you know, he shouldn't be picked again? Is it too simple to say that?
I think it's too simple to say he shouldn't be picked again. He possibly shouldn't be picked this weekend. But that's not to say fellas can't improve in the medium to long term. He obviously brings a lot of attacking qualities. But yeah, I mean, I think we had some defensive doubts prior to debut, but I mean, it just does go to point out the step up that's always referenced about international rugby. But I mean, look, they won the game, and the positive for me would be that I think there's a lot more in the team, and I think individual performances, strangely, you know, I know we made the point about Gary Ringrose, but there have been some very strong individual performances, and that shows that there is talent there that hasn't been quite harnessed collectively. There's a phrase doing the rounds at these NEFIT briefings that we've all become experts in watching every week that kind of came to mind the other night when I was thinking about this, but an abundance of caution is a phrase that they like to use. And, you know, I don't want to veer into the Eamon Dunphy territory now and have the Corkon lads there rolling their eyes at me. But like,
go on, do it.
You know, sports, international sports are representative of a society or a culture that they represent by their very nature. And like, you know, if ever a sport was representative of a kind of official middle-class Ireland, it's rugby. And I think we can see the conservative nature of that, like, across every aspect of Irish society, and rugby seems to very much conform to that. And there's just a massive aversion to risk of any kind, and risk is associated with this flamboyant attack in rugby. But I think it's become very reductionist with this team, and that, you know, it's not safe to pick and jam anymore because of the new breakdown rules. You know, carrying the ball, you see the amount of turnovers that are happening in the game when people lose their support. So, you know, we talked about this a few weeks ago. It's like kicking the ball away is now equated as being low risk, which I still don't understand really. But it's kind of, it's like there's an attempt to kind of not make mistake your way to glory, which I don't think any team in the history of sport has reached ultimate glory by setting out to not make mistakes. At some point, you have to go for it a little bit.
You were brought up, you see, on the champagne rugby that the cookies in your Munsters played through the 90s and the 2000s. The wide game in Tom Clifford Park, and you've been spoiled by that.
Well, I saw Gary Owen playing that way anyway, at least, to be fair.
It's the only glimpse you got of it. I mean, look, Johnny, like Wes's point, and actually Simon Hick wrote a very good piece for the Currency as well. And the headline on the article was, you know, the riskiest thing to do in top level sport is to not take risks. And, you know, it does seem like, well, whether it's a hangover from the Joe Schmidt era, but Joe Schmidt's mantra was literally follow the blueprint, follow the plan, and don't take risks. It does seem like Andy Farrell has just kind of carried that over, not to the same degree. And I think the players are being given more license to express themselves, but it's very hard to make the case that Ireland are moving upwards, if not moving across, under Andy Farrell.
Yeah, like you look at the last 2 minutes that Wes has referenced, and they kicked the ball away. Like, you know, I think there's two sides to it. That you have Stuart Hogg on the pitch who can kick from 50 and anywhere inside that half. So, like, when you've got the risk of carrying the ball into contact, and Roma Pot, I wouldn't trust him with the whistle or not. He's going to blow that, like, and all of a sudden it's this kind of thing, Hogg to kick it to draw, and the flat thing that Donal's talking about. So I'd have some sympathy, but Wes is right. Like, the least amount of risk is kicking the ball to the Scottish backfield where Stuart Hogg could well be, and he's one of the most exciting players in the backfield in rugby. Like, you know, so it's funny when we're talking about that being the least risky thing to do. But, like, you know, you speak about France and the way they played. The only reason they stayed in that game with England is because of the way they play, and they throw a pass, and you see that the set piece is doing the rounds where they threw it over the top, and there's a bit of a loop, and then Henry Slade bid in a 13 because Vakatawa was so good, and they scored an unbelievable try in the corner. Ireland don't have that ability. So if we're going to give England that amount of ball, France were woeful in terms of what they did with the ball. The way they kicked that ball away, Ireland will not get away with that. And, you know, I said that Ireland won't kick the ball that loosely, but they will kick the ball. And we've seen that time and time again where you kick the ball back to England, the wave of pressure comes back. They're way too strong. Maybe not in the way they're playing at the moment, but geez, the way they played last week, you're not going to survive with that. So like, even an English side that's not really humming, like we're not going to be able to take that amount of pressure into our own half and not give away scores. So like, yeah, you'd hope that, you know, they can find softer channels on the outside to get themselves up the pitch, to allow themselves to play a bit more rugby. But like, if you look at the start of the Scotland game, we went up by a try because Johnny Sexton kicked the ball into their 22, and they targeted short hog. Robbie Henshaw has obviously been lauded for his kick chase and how he got the ball back. Now, I thought the second kick, the crossfield kick, was quality play to actually get out of a ruck, look up and kick at the other side. Now, the execution wasn't what Johnny Sexton is normally about, but between Keith Earls and Robbie Henshaw, they finished that. But that's not attacking rugby. Do you know what I mean? That's getting the ball back from a kick and then, yeah, off the cuff, kicking a ball across field, and that was class. But like, you know, you do need to throw a pass, and maybe that run kick option. England do a lot of run kick where they throw a pass first and then they kick it into these corners. Like, I know the Crusaders would have used that a lot, and Tyler Blindell brought that into Munster, where you kick it into these coffin corners or whatever they're calling it, and it's very hard to exit. I think in 2018, was it 17 or 18, when England really upset, maybe it was 18 when England really upset Ireland, they took that blueprint, and Elliot Daly was knocking them in there all the time. So like, you know, at least if we can throw the pass and then put a more probing kick in there, that's more attacking rugby than just putting the ball in the air. But I know the way it is, like it is a risky business. It's international rugby. Like, you can't just play in your own half, but I do think they need to get out of their half with a bit more creativeness and putting the other team under a bit more pressure, you know.
Yeah, I don't, you know, you and I walked away from a lot of under-20s games over the last 3 or 4 years. And just remarking about how happy we were to see the head coaches in the position, whoever was in charge, just allow the players, I guess, a freedom to express themselves, a license to play and to try things. And it was so novel, really, because we just weren't seeing it at a senior level, you know, from an Irish team. And obviously under-20s and senior international, there's a huge gulf between the two in terms of standards, a step up. But I've always just wished that Ireland could be a little bit more creative or exciting, or, you know, just open to different styles of play, because that's what I'm seeing from France now. The way they play, it's exciting, it's creative, it's fast, it's a high tempo. And I just wish that the Irish players, because we know they have the ability, would be able to take them to senior level and try something.
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism. I think you go back to the 20s. One of the issues you have is obviously you're bringing players together who don't know each other. It's a new group every year, so you have a massive turnover in personnel that you don't have, say, at international level. So, like, take for example Noel McNamara, who, you know, we've seen in operation for the past number of years. I know he's stepped down. I think this year now he's Leinster Academy manager. But you're right. I mean, he encouraged the players to play. Certainly, you know, the Irish 20 sides that we've seen in the last 2 years, the most impressive thing is they had the skill set to play that offloading game, to attack space when it was there. You know, forwards like Thomas Ahern and these guys looking comfortable with the ball in hand. So it's wrong to say that Irish players don't have the skill set. This then becomes a question of whether they're encouraged to show them or not. I mean, the bottom line is, from an attacking perspective, taking the Italy game out of it, or tries, or 4 tries in the other games, you had a line-out overthrow against Wales that Robbie Henshaw picked up, and Clive Byrne managed to score. Against France, it was our line-out that we messed up, and fairness, Ronan Keller picked up a loose ball, scored at the corner. And the 2 tries that we're talking about on Saturday, Johnny Sexton's kick, a collision in the air, and then Ty Byrne picking again from 5 meters. So, like, the biggest issue I think Ireland have is they're not, you know, they're not posing a threat for teams outside of their 22. And you can't, teams seem to have become very familiar with the way Ireland play. The other thing I think is just the lack of variety. I mean, you look at the French game, and Johnny, you're the coach, so you might comment on this, but from an attacking perspective, I'd say 80% of all French lineouts was ball off the middle or the tail, or a throw over. I mean, obviously the power play, the brilliant try that they got in the corner, you know, the line-out throw over the top to Fico, which they did against Ireland as well. Like, why don't we have the capacity to do that? To be fair to Joe Schmidt, like, we were brilliant in terms of, we were inventive in terms of creating opportunities like that offset play. But we seem to have lacked that as well. We just don't seem to have the variety. 9 times out of 10 in the opposition half, we'll take it, we'll maul it, it'll be stodgy, there'll be a box kick, go up, there'll be a chase, and we're looking for the opposition either to concede possession in their 22 or to give away a penalty at a breakdown because we've gone through 7 or 8 phases. And, you know, it's just teams work you out. And I just don't think we show enough variety in the way that we're attacking.
Let's call a spade, Wes. Mike Catt is an issue, isn't he? Like, he has to be. He's the attack coach. And our attack is stale, stagnant. As Donal outlined, the tries he scored have been just predictable and nothing to write home about. So Mike Catt is an issue, is he not?
Yeah, he would certainly appear to be. Now, there is this school of thought that attack is the thing that takes the longest to bed in. But, I mean, not to digress from that completely, but, like, I mean, everyone's talking about the England-France game as well, and I think it's telling that there's been so much comment on it, because I think that's probably because there's been so much stodge that's been played in all competitions over the last few months. Like, I actually think the game is in a bit of trouble, and, you know, or is certainly on the way to being in a bit of trouble as a spectacle. Like, and we referenced this last week. Bert referenced it with regards, you know, the approach, the kind of close quarters, pick and jam approach that teams are bringing to bear when they're in the opposition's red zone. But, like, to me, the new breakdown laws are a massive issue now. I don't know if you can think back to the penalty that Ben Earl won, which was overturned in the last minute of the England-France game the weekend. If you just forget about it being overturned for a minute and you think of that, when someone gets into that legal jackal position now, I mean, they obviously wanted to avoid this situation where someone is in that poach position and people are firing themselves like missiles at him from 20 yards away from a safety point of view, which makes sense, and the optics of it are terrible. Now, on the flip side of that, the stats on injuries around the breakdown are actually surprisingly low, particularly head injuries compared to other facets of play. But the point I'm making is, someone gets into that position now, that poach position, and really the penalty is blown as soon as they're in the position. Now, you can say the person that's been tackled isn't released and it should be a penalty, but, like, there's no second or two's leeway given to see, are they attempting to steal the ball? There's no contest for possession. It's just a race to present a picture to the referee that you're in a poach position. And the contest for the ball is fundamental to what separates rugby union from rugby league. Like, you're getting a legitimate jackal attempt every 5 or 6 phases. And where this ultimately leads is, you're getting, like, Ben Earl wins that penalty. By the time everyone gets set, the ball's kicked to touch, you go down and have your line out. The play is stopped for 90 seconds to 2 minutes. So what you're working towards here is a situation where you're getting 5 or 6 phases of rugby for 2 minutes of stoppage. And, like, that's not an equation that works as a spectacle at all. And equally, that's the exact reason why teams aren't taking chances ball in hand, because the risk of being penalised at the breakdown is becoming far too high. And, like, I'm all for the safety concerns, but I mean, at some point the game stops being the game. It becomes something different. Like you're getting to a point with rugby now where you're almost like getting to where Gaelic football has been, where the game is in this, like, perpetual existential crisis because there's too much rule tweaking, and it starts to make a bit of a mockery of the whole sport at a certain stage. I mean, you saw it in the same phase of play in that England game. Ellis Genge got a penalty in the scrum, which ultimately led to a Toja's try. He clearly drops onto one knee, and then he gets the nudge from his knee. And Alan Quinlan said it in commentary. You're kind of going, this has become a complete lottery as to who drops first. Does an elbow hit the ground? Does a knee hit the ground? Mm-hmm. Anyone gets any nudge in the scrum, and it's a penalty automatically. Whereas there's no rule against pushing a scrum 20 yards as long as it's safe. And you're kind of looking at things like a scrum, a breakdown, and you're going, these are like the pillars of the sport. Mm-hmm. And they're now radically different to what they were a number of years ago. And like, I text Donal the other night asking him this, and like, I'm open to correction or other people's opinion here, but as in terms of how it's refereed, in terms of a spectacle, in terms of safety, and in terms of being conducive to attacking rugby, after 20 plus years of professionalism, is the breakdown any better now than it was in the amateur game? And if it's not,
well done.
There's something seriously wrong there.
Well, I think what you're saying, Wes, is sort of the law of unintended consequences as such.
Absolutely.
In that you have the law, sometimes it isn't a change in the law, it's a change in the interpretation of existing law, which is what's happening at the moment at the breakdown. You swing from one extreme to the other, where you have things like the crocodile roll and that horrible injury that we saw for Jack Willis. We saw breakdown injuries to one of the young Irish players at under 20 World Cup, fellas coming in on the side, tackling along on the knees. So therefore you tweak the law in relation to that, but you're 100% right in terms, if you take the element of contest away, what you need actually, and you go back, you were asking me about the amateur days and the breakdown, and I was thinking about it, I didn't come back to you, but the bottom line is you need to have a contest that engages more people, more forwards. As of now, opposition teams are only sending one, if not two players into the ruck on the basis that they know that the opposition are going to retain possession. You've no chance of getting it back. So as a consequence of that, you have 6 or 7 of the opposition forwards standing up on their feet, creating this defensive line across the field. So you have to find a way to make more competition, to entice more players to get into the breakdown. That in itself will create the space that you're looking for off quick ball. I mean, even the opportunities of recycling the ball quickly, and we've seen Ireland now, their breakdown has improved to the degree whereby 60% of their ball has been recycled in 3 seconds or under. Now that sounds brilliant, but maybe it's been recycled quicker because nobody's contesting for it, and all the other forwards are standing out in the middle of the field. So you're defeating the purpose. So all you're doing is the scrum half and the 10 are getting more ball, with more fellas coming down on top of them, and then that cuts their options, so they're forced to kick it away. So yeah, look, I do agree with you in terms of I think the breakdown, the weighting of it has gone the other way now. You should, before you had kind of 2 or 3 seconds after the tackle to be able to place the ball, and that enticed your support players to come in to sort of clean out the opposition and present the ball better for you. Whereas now, I think nobody is contesting to any degree. Of course, I could go back years ago when you had proper rucking. I mean, it isn't that long ago that you trained so much on a Sunday morning where you had fellas under nets, where you bound with players from your own side to hit rucks, to go in at a certain body height, to drive the opposition off the ball. And if there were opposition players lying there, you rucked them out of it. And, nobody ever got badly injured from a ruck. You got a fucking couple of stitches, maybe, if it was in the wrong place.
Olivier Rouma might argue that one with you.
Yeah, well, look, there's exceptions to every rule. But the bottom line is it was self-policing. Scotland were never the biggest, but they were ruck crazy. And you knew when you played Scotland. I mean, New Zealand was easy in comparison to from a ruck point of view than Scotland. Scotland had 8 fellas. It was like being spit out the back of a combine harvester or something. But so I mean, like it's gone the other extreme now. But look, I agree with your point. The bottom line is, by virtue of the fact that people aren't contesting, or everything is with the poacher now, it's just encouraging forwards not to get in there, stay on their feet. You have to find a way to engage more forwards where they're being sucked into the breakdown, and allow, create more space on the field. That's what we're talking about.
Exactly. This is exactly what we're talking about. And this is what World Rugby are looking at, Johnny. And, they're trialing things left, right and centre. They're trying the 50-22 rule, where if you kick the ball inside your own half and it bounces inside the opposite 22, it gives the team who kicked the line out. They're trying different things with the end point of hoping to create more space. And if you have more space, hopefully you'll have more attacking rugby and more tries and so on. But we see it does seem to be a bit of a rabbit hole here, and nobody really knows how to fix the problem.
Yeah, it's tough. And like, the 2 lads are far older than me, so they've lost me there for
far older, yeah.
I'm not getting grouped in with Lenihan here.
But if you look
Easy now, Johnny.
If you look at who's trialing it, it's the Southern Hemisphere is trialing it. and we'll take it on if it works. Like we're still not leading the charge in trialing different law variations. So like again, they're ahead of us, and they'll react to those laws faster than us if they do come in, and then they'll get the nudge on that as well. So like, yeah, we're not very proactive on it, but like, I would have quite enjoyed the 50-22 rule. I think Rob Kearney got one last weekend or the weekend before. I think that's a nice way of taking the emphasis away from contacts, putting more people in the backfield, reducing the front line, and actually maybe being able to speed the ball up a bit. You might only lose one or two guys from the front field, and you'll still get 7 forwards on their feet, but you might get them in wider positions and having to defend a Gary Ringrose who's looking on the outside, or Robbie Henshaw who does what he does against France and go on the outside and go back around the ruck or whatever it is, and it just creates a little bit more space. So I don't know, something does have to be done, but don't, like on your point as well, referees are only allowing the first guy to poach. So it's only one guy that's going to go in there, and a tackler maybe that's getting back up. And we see Ireland putting the emphasis on the tackler not being on the ground at all. You see Keith Earls is very good at it. He's back up and he's into that ruck. So maybe actually it's only the tackler in the ruck, or the tackler can reset and another guy goes in. So now you've only one guy in the ruck. Max nearly a lot of the time. It's probably Tyburn most of the time, in fairness. So he's been unbelievable at it. But yeah, you do have to find a way to speed the game up. The game is actually probably has been sped up to some degree because the rucks are very fast, but with a full line in front of them. So it's a difficult one, and it is a rabbit hole. I don't know if we're going to have the answer on a single podcast, but something has to be done to create the space or time on the ball to be able to attack a little bit better.
Okay.
Sorry, Johnny. Has the 50-22? I mean, I don't see as much of this the Australian rugby at the moment. Is it making an impact down there, or is it I presume it's a work in progress?
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of it myself, to be honest. You just see the clips, but like I think even with the one being held up over the line, it's a goal line dropout. Again, it's less contact, less kind of messing around the goal line, and it has to be doing something. Now you can argue as well that it's just not the game. Like that's a rugby league thing, and as you go back to your point, that the game is going to go further away from what it was before. So like it is a little bit different, and sometimes you look at that game going, it is a different game to what we've got up here. Maybe surfaces are different, the intent to throw the ball is a bit different, but again, I think with Rob Kearney, because he's played so much rugby here, and he's obviously played to a level, and he's gone down there and he's talking about the differences that they're allowed to do things. Now it's club level there, he's not playing international level there, so it can't be a direct comparison. But I think if you do some of those things in the provincial game up here, like you're not going to get away with it. And I can understand it to a degree, especially from a coaching point of view. You can definitely understand it to a degree, but I'm hoping that Ireland are bringing in this kind of decision making, the ability to offload the ball, and that the players are trying to get used to it, and that we are seeing a change. Like you see, James Lowe gave one to Johnny Sexton, didn't he? CJ Stander was offloading a ball in contact. So I think we are seeing a change. Maybe they're just slow to kind of bring it in, and I give them the benefit of the doubt that I hope that things are changing a small bit. But Wes, I think you said that the attack is the hardest thing to change, or the thing that takes the longest. And I've seen that definitely from a playing perspective and from a coaching perspective. It does take a lot more time to embed that and get the players to have the confidence to do that. But, as a player standing on a pitch, you love if the team are just going to maul all day. Now you're kind of saying to your forwards, step up or don't bother. You can step up or we go home with a loss. You step up, we win the game. Because if you're standing there as a 10 and at best you're getting the 12 in your channel, you stand your 7 beside you and hope for the best, but you're not making decisions. It's easy to throw yourself under a tackle, whether you're strong enough for that or not. It's not easy to have to read that player coming at you and something out the back, and maybe knowing that they have the ability to go to the width. So like it's the decision making that makes the game, not just crashing into fellas and getting over the game line and hoping that the ball becomes quick. Standing in the 10, 12 or 13 channel when teams are picking and going, you're just kind of going, we just need to front up here and get under them and hopefully drive them back. Whereas if you're doing the French thing, or even the Leinster thing, where the ball can just move all of a sudden, their heads are going to be on a swivel all day. The defenders can't just jam in all day. They have to be looking up, and that creates a bit more space for when they do that kind of pick and jam or whatever it is. So it's interesting. The game is definitely changing, but hopefully it's not going away too far from what we want, like Wes said.
Okay, well, something we'll come back to. Just a couple other things I want to talk about. Don, were you surprised by CJ Stander's news?
I was. Didn't see it coming. There had been talk, that obviously we know he's in negotiations with the RFU. The contract was up at the end of June. There was a suggestion earlier in the year that he was going to the Blue Bulls. And maybe we shouldn't discount that either. But the bottom line is, I think you have to factor in lockdown here, Hugh. And we all know what lockdown has been like. I just reading Ellis Genge talking about really how difficult and boring it has been in the England camp in the Six Nations. how they can't wait to get out of it, despite the fact they all get on well and blah, blah, blah. But like you're 2 months in there. You look, it's well known that CJ's wife and his daughter have been back in South Africa during the lockdowns. CJ was back himself there for a period of time. And he is, I was in South Africa in 2018 when Munster played Southern Kings in George, which was his hometown. And I mean, Munster had more South African fans than they had obviously people traveling. But it was interesting to see just how revered he was in the area, what he had done with his career in Munster and Ireland had resonated down there. He was always going to go back and there's family farm, family business there. I get the impression maybe that the first offer he got from the IRFU kind of left him very cold. Like CJ isn't a complicated guy. He's a very straight, honest fella. Look, the one thing, and my views on the overseas, the 3-year residency, I was never in favor of it. I hated it, actually. I'm delighted when it was extended to 5 years. But that said, I respected 100% what the honesty and the commitment that CJ Stander gave to Munster and Ireland. That could never, ever be questioned. And I think he felt that maybe, that needed to be rewarded in terms of the contract he was offered. So it was easy for him to turn down. And we understand, look, everybody's contracts have been dropped because of COVID, because of the financial scenario. But maybe, look, that was just another factor. But I do think COVID has accelerated a process that was going to be inevitable anyway. He was always going back to South Africa. Having his wife and his young daughter out there for the past number of months hasn't been a help. When all the other players, Ireland have released players to go back out of camp with their families for a couple of days in between the matches. CJ chose to stay in the hotel because he'd no one to go home to. So, I mean, that accelerates all those things. Look, he's been a magnificent performer for both Munster and Ireland. So I suppose to answer your question, I was shocked because I hadn't been expecting it, but I could fully understand the logic and the thought process behind that decision. But would I be surprised if in 6 months or 9 months, chasing the ostriches around the farm, I'd say he might get fed up with that after a while, and you might see him back playing in the Pro 16 for one of the South African franchises.
What did you make of it, Wes?
I was shocked when I saw it first because it was so out of the blue. I think you're starting to see the mood change from kind of shock and, tributes to a couple of people maybe questioning the whole project player notion again. I mean, someone did come over here for 9 years or whatever it was, make a good living and kind of seem to leave at the height of their powers. I think in this case, with CJ, like, in fairness to him, in terms of physical commitment and putting his body forward for punishment, like, I just don't think you could possibly question his commitment. I think when he first kind of broke into the Munster team, the Irish team, maybe from around 2014, 15 till about 2017 or 18, he was absolutely world class. I think his form dipped, his explosiveness probably dipped a slight bit in the last year or two, in that I think Joe with Ireland played such an attritional game, and CJ he was almost too honest for his own good sometimes, in terms of he was always willing to present, to kind of attempt to turn slow ball into fast, turn up for kind of thankless carries, which I'm sure endeared him massively to his teammates, but probably wasn't as eye-catching as the way he had been playing a couple of years previous to that. And I think it probably sums up the difficulties Munster will face going forward in terms of, like, both competing with Leinster and in terms of winning trophies, and that, you've seen John Hodnett and Gavin Coombs emerge this year, and just as you get two, you lose one. And I think with the resources Munster have at their disposal, they're always going to be waiting for this perfect storm of young players coming through, the right overseas signings, everybody being fit, to kind of come together, you know, they might produce 10 good players over a 5-year period, and Leinster will probably produce 25. And it kind of just highlighted that difficulty they'll have for me as well. But no, look, strange to see someone go at 30, but he's been a top player for both, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess disappointing for Munster fans, Johnny, that CJ will be leaving at the end of the season. But on the more positive side of things, Joey Carbery started for the first time last weekend. What did you make of his performance? And what are you hoping to see from him coming back into the fray for Munster?
Jeez, like, it happened all of a sudden. I know there was kind of whispers behind the scenes that it was happening, but you know, you're nearly kind of going, as a Munster fan, you're kind of just hoping it was true. And yeah, he's lived up to it. I mean, geez, he's an exciting player. And I think, you know, if it was 3 months earlier, if he had a couple of games under his belt, I think that Six Nations campaign could have looked slightly different. And at least having the competition there, like you say these things, you don't know how he's going to present in Irish camp, and you don't know how he's going to present over the next 6 to 12 months. But he's living up to all expectation at the moment. Like that try at the weekend, handing off Shane Daly to get there and giving the ball back to him. I think he's been rock solid since he's come back. He looks like he's enjoying himself and just taking it in his stride. I think the fear was that he'd just come back and try to impress, and you know, an ankle wouldn't help him, or he'd pick up an injury of some sort and face more frustration. But it looks like he's just doing his bit. He's stroking the ball over the bar. He doesn't look like there's much effort going into it. Obviously, there's a lot of effort in behind the scenes, but like, he's just stroking that. And I think I said it that, you know, it's the first time since I retired that I've got very, very excited about a player and turned back into a fanboy, because he's just so exciting to watch. And I think it's going to be great for the supporters to be able to follow a player with that kind of excitement, and maybe mask the CJ thing. But you know, the CJ one is, I think we've all been in a bit of mourning in the last day or two. I went through all the stages of disappointment, anger, and frustration and understanding, I think. But you know, the excitement around some of the players at Munster with Joey obviously driving that, and you look at Gavin Coombs, Jack O'Sullivan, Jack O'Donoghue, John Hodnett when he can get back on his feet. There's a lot of Irish and West Cork coming through that Munster kind of background. It is exciting. Like, it's not going to be easy to replace CJ, but you definitely have a couple of players there that have the ability to step into Irish camp at least. But yeah, what Joey will bring to the guys that are coming in, like a bit of like we spoke about in attack. You don't know what Joey's going to do. The way he was running, even when he made that line break, his hips were going everywhere, his feet were going the other way, and defenders didn't know what to do, so they jam in, and then Shane Daly allows him to go through a gap and finish a try that I think he's deserved in the last couple of weeks. So very exciting times, to be fair. But yeah, we've definitely lost a good one at CJ.
Okay, lads, look, we've England this weekend. Donal, look, I don't think I've spoken to a single person who gives Ireland much of a chance to actually go and beat them, on the basis of, I suppose, how good England were against France last weekend, and also the Ireland-Scotland game and the performance, I guess, and the mistakes and whatever after it. It could be a long outing for Andy Farrell and for Ireland, and it'll be interesting to gauge, I suppose, where we are in relation to England at the moment.
Look, I think you'll know exactly where you are when the final whistle goes on Saturday afternoon. I put it this way to you. If it was the England team that played against Scotland the first day, played against Italy, played well in the last 15 minutes against Wales, then I'd say, yeah, I'd give Ireland a great chance of winning in Dublin. If it's the England team that sort of rediscovered their mojo and their attacking intent, that was evident in Cardiff, to be fair, but their discipline destroyed any hope they had of winning that game. But that they were able to sort of relaunch so impressively against France, then I'd be very worried. Like, the bottom line, when you look at the last two games, psychologically, game management-wise, we have the upper hand over Scotland. And I think Scotland knew that as well. And Scotland, with all their bravado, like, we had beaten them 4 times recently going into that game, or 5 times, was it? No, we'd beaten, that was 6 in a row. Likewise, England have beaten us 4 in a row. I think England, if we don't change the way we play, then England will beat us, and beat us well. For me, it's a big test of the management now, because certainly 3 of those, England have won the last 4 games, right? One of those was a World Cup warm-up that was under Joe Schmidt's watch. So Andy Farrell has been at the helm for the last 3 matches, and England have, like, you go back to some of those games, they were almost better playing without the ball. They smashed us physically. They defensively allowed us. They almost gave us the ball and said, okay, come running at us. They cut us off from the outside and they forced us to carry into them, which they just pummeled us and blew us away. And even you go back to the Nations Cup game, you know, the scoreline, I think, was 18-9. But like for me, there was a far bigger gap between the sides than on the scoreline. So if we don't look to play a different way, well, then the same outcome is inevitable. The concern I have of England, and they seem to have their tails up, and as I say, looking at a combination of the comments coming out of their camp, one Ellis Genge, they can't wait for the Six Nations to be over. So therefore you feel that there'll be kind of one massive effort from them. Likewise, you had Johnny May interviewed during the week, seemed to infer that they finally got to Eddie Jones, and a bit like what's supposed to be happening with Ireland, they took over a bit more control on the field. And as a consequence of that, their attacking game was far better. Like they did play well against Wales, but the 14 penalties they gave away at crucial times killed them, not to mind the two bizarre refereeing calls. Now, you have to question why did they fall away? And I'm not taking from Wales because Wales finished that game brilliantly. But if it's the England that have rediscovered that attacking intent and couple that with the power that they have up front, and ally that with the fact that the Saracens guys who had no matches for 2 months at the start of the championship are now 7 weeks further down and they've 4 games under their belt, well then you'd have to be concerned about the outcome of this game.
Yeah, I think, Wes, it's hard to make a case for optimism here this weekend. And England have, as Donal said, rightly said, have had our number every time they've played us over the last couple of years, primarily because they just know exactly what we're going to do when we're going to do it. And it's very easy to defend that. So unless we try something different this weekend, I can't see the results being any different.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. What we've seen so far is, you know, will certainly play into England's strengths. Their back three will be well able to deal with the kicking threat. You're not going to bash your way through them. You know, there's two schools of thought with them, that they're back on track after last week, and in which case you'd strongly fancy them. I would have a slight inkling that maybe France probably resonates more as a challenge for an English team than Ireland do. And I think everything was on the line for them last week, and maybe they're not quite as to the wall this week in terms of needing a result. You know, possibly we're maybe clutching at straws there, but yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt England are favourites. I'd be surprised to see us win it.
Yeah, me too. Johnny, last word to you. Any chance?
I think there is a chance, but I don't know if it's in our hands. Do you know what I mean? Like we saw with the Scotland game that we were bigging Scotland up until we stopped and thought, actually, do you know what? Scotland are bluffers and they fall away every time they get there. So, like, you know, you can think about it both ways. They got over France. Will that be a very hard thing to get up and down and back up with? You know, you see that emotional toll it takes on players, and at international level, I think that's going to be very difficult. So hopefully that stands to us. But again, that's not our play. That's England maybe not turning up a small bit, and just emotionally it's taken over them. You know, like Wes said, they got their win. Is it going to change what their outcome of the tournament is? They beat France. They know now they're back there. Will they just saunter through the last one? You know, Donal said that they're struggling with English camp. That could mean they go out on one last or they just want to get home and they just want to get out of Dublin. So, like, I think it's very, very hard to call it. On the kind of black and white on paper, I think our game is under pressure. I think England will just, if we give them the same amount of possession that other teams have given them and that Ireland have kicked away to other teams, I think we'll be under a lot of pressure. So it needs to be a small bit of a change, a small bit more ball in hand. It'll take a Robbie Henshaw stepping up against the English again. You know, it'll take someone like Johnny Sexton to have another one of his great games. But I think we're under pressure. All the signs are pointing to England winning again in Dublin, which is, it's not a good sight. But you're hoping a couple of emotional things go our way, a couple of calls go our way. Hopefully another weekend where there's not too many cards in the Six Nations weekend, because last weekend was a revelation to watch and a bit more excitement. So I think it's hopeful rather than tactically we're going to win it. But a couple of things definitely have to go our way on both sides, with England not bringing it and with us bringing a bit extra.
Okay, that's about all the time we have on the podcast this week. We will be back to review it all next week, hopefully a little bit more optimistic than perhaps our predictions. Don't forget you can listen to live commentary on RTÉ Radio 1 this weekend with Michael and Donal, and you can follow the match on the tracker on the RTÉ Sport website as well. Enjoy the last round of the Six Nations, and we'll talk to you next week.